Kia ora, I'm Sherry Kinnear and welcome to Focus Live. Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern is set to announce when our borders will reopen to tourists. With our newsroom understanding, she'll bring the initial dates forward significantly. It's expected she'll reveal full vaccinated tourists from Australia can arrive without the need for managed or self-isolation from 11:59 p.m. on April 12th. It's the same date that's already been set for the return of international students and temporary visa holders. Visitors from all other countries with which New Zealand has visa-waiver arrangements, like the United Kingdom, will be able to come here within weeks of that, followed by visitors from all other countries. Originally, travellers from Australia and visa-waiver countries were to be allowed into the country MIQ-free before July, but no specific date had been decided, while visitors from the rest of the world were to be allowed in from October. It comes as the peak of our Omicron outbreak nears and the risk profile of new arrivals changes further. There were just 17 cases reported at the border yesterday. The 7-day rolling average of community cases, meanwhile, is around 19,200.
Kia ora koutou katoa. Good afternoon. Today I'm announcing the next stage in our border reopening work. Our border has already reopened to New Zealanders from around the world. And on Monday, critical and skilled workers also became eligible to enter without isolation to shore up our workforces in industries such as agriculture, technology and construction as our economy rebounds. And we have now received guidance that it is safe to significantly bring forward the next stage of border reopening work to welcome back our tourists. In doing so, we are sending a very clear message that we are accelerating our economic recovery. Closing our border was one of the first actions we took to stop COVID-19 over 2 years ago, and its reopening will spur our economic recovery throughout the remainder of the year. You'll recall in February this year when we announced our border reopening plans, we also said the dates could change as we experienced our own Omicron wave and looked to come out the other side. That is now the situation we find ourselves in. That means we can plan with greater certainty, with the comfort of knowing the impact of these changes are safe and manageable. In short, we're ready to welcome the world back. And today I can confirm from 11:59 p.m. Tuesday, 12 April, vaccinated Australians can travel to New Zealand. And from 11:59 p.m. Sunday, the 1st of May, vaccinated travellers from visa-waiver countries and those with valid visitor visas can travel to New Zealand. Our strong health response, including having the lowest death rate in the OECD over the past 2 years, is now also an asset. We are a safe place to visit, and New Zealand will be ready with open arms. In particular, I look forward to welcoming back our trans-Tasman travellers, who have historically made up 40% of our international arrivals, around 1.5 million Australians. They will be able to arrive in time for the Australian school holidays and provide a particular boost for our coming winter ski season. Prior to COVID-19, tourism was a huge export earner for New Zealand, contributing 5.5% to GDP, bringing in about 41 billion altogether. But the spend reaches much further than that. A further 11 billion is generated indirectly, and tourist demand benefits a range of industries: accommodation, transport, retail, not to mention adventure, entertainment, arts and culture. It was also responsible too for 8% of our national workforce. I do want to acknowledge that this decision comes at a time when we are reaching a level of COVID we haven't seen before, but had planned for. And I do want to offer some reassurance. Firstly, we know that travel numbers will be below 2019. It will take time to rebuild. And while we have removed all travel isolation so that tourists will be able to experience the sights and sounds immediately, they will be required to have a pre-departure test. That pre-departure test can be a supervised LAMP, rapid antigen or a PCR test. Then when they arrive, they have a further 2 rapid antigen tests on day 01 and day 56, which is the case at the border presently. And so we strike the balance. An earlier reopening for tourism and the air travel that brings also increases capacity for our exports, helping to lower freight rates and the flow-on costs of goods that stems from that. This will be a further boost for our biggest export earner, the primary sector, which is already receiving record prices for goods and contributing significantly to our economic recovery. Our work to keep shipping lines and supply chains open and new free trade agreements such as the UK and EU further support economic recovery. But ultimately, the most poignant moments in reopening to the world so far have surely been those when family and friends are reunited. It's been particularly timely to see that and feel grateful for it in light of the events we are all bearing witness to around the world. But a critical element is also to reunite visitors with our regional economies, to welcome back our tourists and extend our manaakitanga once more. I'm proud that New Zealand is a country able in this moment in time to provide a safe place for our tourists to return to. And during my international engagements this year, I will be helping to lead the charge to accelerate the growth of our top export markets, our primary sector and our tourism sector, encouraging people to buy New Zealand made and also to come and see us for themselves. The Minister of Tourism, Stuart Nash, will have more to say around further government support for kick-starting tourism shortly. But for now, I will hand over to him to share some information on a campaign to attract back our Australian visitors. Minister Nash.
Thank you very much, Prime Minister. This is a most exciting moment for our hard-working tourism sector for the past 2 years, and we are really ready to hit the ground running. I don't think even the most ardent Kiwi sports fan would begrudge me saying we are ready to roll out the green and gold carpet for our Australian neighbours and in time for their school holidays. As the Prime Minister has outlined, they will be closely followed by visa-waiver countries from key Northern Hemisphere markets like the United States, UK, Germany, Canada, Japan, Singapore and others. We have missed you. In light of the announcement, this week the government's tourism marketing agency, Tourism New Zealand, starts a new campaign in Australia. The new campaign seeks to persuade Australians that our unique landscapes, hospitality and the friendliness of Kiwis are now, quote, within your wildest dreams. The campaign highlights dream experiences sought out by Australian visitors, such as fine dining, jet boating, cycling through wonderful Hawke's Bay vineyards, sorry PM, I had to get the Hawke's Bay in there somehow, or stargazing in our famous dark sky reserves. Australian travellers are the immediate focus of our activation efforts, given the ease of travel on the short-haul route and the fact that Australians constituted 40% of all our overseas visitors pre-COVID. Their school holidays and Easter Anzac break in April are popular times to make a short hop across the Tasman. We also have our ski season getting underway from June. Historically, 71% of all international tourists who came to ski were Australians, and this generated more than $200 million in winter spending out of the $2.7 billion of their total contribution pre-COVID. The industry knows there is a rebuild ahead. International travel will be very competitive and airlines will take time to build up their schedules and routes. Even some of the world's largest tourism operators, such as Heathrow Airport, are predicting a 5-year rebuild. So we know that international bookings from international tourists will be measured. In the first few months, we expect people will travel mainly to connect with friends or family before travel picks up for winter holidays, ski tourism, and ultimately our peak summer season in 2022-23. In the meantime, Tourism New Zealand will continue their strong focus on the domestic market. It had solid results with the Do Something New New Zealand campaign, which encouraged Kiwis to see more of their own backyard. A new domestic campaign will launch in autumn, In summary, Tourism New Zealand has worked hard over the past 2 years to keep the aspirational brand New Zealand alive in the mind of travellers. With borders now opening, Tourism New Zealand's activity becomes focused on converting holiday dreams and aspiration into action in the form of actual bookings. Our 100% pure New Zealand brand remains very compelling driver for tourists, and we can't wait to see them again. Over to you, PM.
Thank you, Minister. Can I finish by saying I know from visiting tourism operators and talking to their staff how tough these past 2 years have been, and not only because of the massive loss of tourism revenue, but because we lost something we derive so much of our identity from. Thank you for the hard yards you did on behalf of all of us. And alongside you, I'm so pleased we can begin a new chapter. Happy to take your questions.
Why are you waiting another month for this, and will we ever get back to pre-COVID levels?
Yeah, for operators who were anticipating a reopening in July, this is a significant shift forward. By reopening in April, we capture the vast majority of Australian school holidays. We're well in advance of the winter ski season, which will be a huge boon for, in particular, tourism markets like Queenstown. This will, I'm sure, be welcome news from our operators.
You can't have tourists coming in here, really, with the restrictions that we have currently in place, can you? Are you going to make any changes to the limits of people in venues? Are you going to require New Zealand vaccine passes from tourists as they enter?
First thing I would say, I mean, at the moment what we have are gathering limits which have not limited the ability of many of our tourism operators, albeit with additional safety mechanisms in place, to continue an offering for domestic tourists. And we would expect that to continue. But also, we are taking a second look at the settings within our COVID protection framework, the use of vaccine passes and mandates. We've already indicated that those are likely to change in short order as we come off the top of our peak.
It's unlikely that those vaccine passes will still be in force by the time.
Cabinet is considering all of that over the course of this week and next, and we'll have announcements to make on the future of those tools next week.
Minister, the word dream was used a few times there by the Tourism Minister. Are we finally leaving the COVID nightmare?
Look, we know COVID is still with us and will be with us for some time, but we are ready to safely move into a new chapter of our management of the pandemic. This brings with it, this change, huge economic opportunities for us. We will be a sought-after market. We're now known globally as not just being clean and green, but also being safe, so we know that we'll be in high demand.
Going back on the issue of vaccine passes, will tourists be required to produce a vaccine certificate or similar?
Well, as we've already indicated, once we come off the back of that Omicron peak, we've already indicated that we'll likely be able to drop the use of vaccine passes. We'll be making more announcements on the future of mandates, passes, and the way our COVID protection framework works next week.
By April, they've got vaccine passes gone by April.
Oh, look, whilst of course we need Cabinet to finalise those decisions, we have already indicated that we see that the role of vaccine passes, once we come through that first wave, changes. Of course, originally they were in place to protect from high-risk environments unvaccinated individuals. Once we come through this wave, many of them will have been exposed to COVID. It changes the need for them altogether. I'm going to give you an opportunity.
Thank you, Prime Minister. Is this a no ifs, no buts reopening? Obviously, previous suspensions and things have happened. Yeah. Can you give tourism operators the utmost certainty that they are after?
We are reopening, and I'm asking our Australian family and friends to book their tickets.
The Australian women's cricket team today said it would be great to be able to play in front of their fans if they are to make the semi-finals and finals at the start of April. Is that possible?
Yeah, look, none of the decisions around what the future of the COVID protection framework looks like are we announcing today, but as I've already indicated, we'll be signalling what that looks like from next week.
Means travelling from Australia, so there's no sort of exemptions for this tournament, a tournament which you've championed and the Sports Minister has obviously changed.
The date that we've set is the date that we've set. Yeah.
Minister, just on what you were saying, that you said announcements would be coming next week. So is that you saying Cabinet will make decisions around what's happening with the mandates on Monday, and you'll be ready to announce that on Monday afternoon at your Hillsgate?
No. As I've said, we're considering over the course of this week and next, and we'll look to make announcements next week. We'll give you a little bit more detail later on.
The Cabinet will be considering it on Monday.
We'll give you the details of the announcements and the timeframes we're working to, Jason, over the next couple of days.
We're not
anticipating announcements on Monday.
Considering it on Monday.
Jason, as you know, we don't always give every single agenda item that is considered by Cabinet, but we will be in a position to make announcements over the next week.
Sorry if you mentioned this already, but when do you envisage the border fully reopening to everybody? And does it sit comfortably with you that we'll be seeing tourists return while many split migrant families won't be able to reunite yet?
Well, keep in mind that what we're also talking about are those who already have valid visas to enter into the country. My recollection is there are hundreds, there are a significant number, Minister Nash may have that number, a significant number who hold valid visas who will be eligible to enter at that point as well. When it comes to those who are from non-visa waiver countries who may be seeking the ability to travel, we will be reviewing whether or not we can bring forward some of those dates also. The major issue there is not a question of safety, but a question of the ability to process those new visas in a timely way. Keeping in mind we're already dealing with a large number of people who are now being made residents through recent decisions and gearing back up a lot of visa processing.
Earlier than October?
Yeah, we haven't yet made those decisions, but we are looking at the ability to bring it forward, if possible. I'll come to you, Henry.
Can you just clarify for the visa waiver countries, people can come on visitor visas and with a visa waiver. Can they get their visa processed if they are, say, a partner of someone who's working here? Or is that visa processing still kind of on hold?
Well, of course, depending on the status of someone who is already here, they may already be eligible to enter, Henry, now. So it very much depends on the status of the person that's here, determining their ability to enter and when they can enter.
Not restarting normal visa processing for the visa waiver countries?
No. Well, the process at the moment, we've said October. We are looking at whether we can bring that forward.
So does that constraint on processing visas for non-visa waiver countries mean
Sorry, Amelia, can you start that again?
So that constraint on not being able to process non-visa waiver country visas, does that mean that we won't be able to see sort of the Chinese and Indian tourists?
No, so one thing to keep in mind, and I am going to check, it is hundreds of thousands. I'm going to get Andrew to just get the specific number of those who already hold visas to travel. So they become eligible from the 1st of May as well. So there will be a number who will be from those non-visa waiver countries who will be able to travel from the 1st of May if they already hold those visitor visas currently. And I'll give you the number that fall into that category.
For those who don't have a visitor visa yet, They will have to wait until October.
We are revisiting that. We wanted to get these decisions out now, but we are considering how we might be able to bring forward other visa categories as well.
And also the constraint on the visa processing means that there's a lot of staff shortages across all of New Zealand. How are we going to address, that the hospitality venues can't actually open because they don't have enough staff, even if there are tourists who want to go to their establishment?
I'll give a first answer to that, and maybe Minister Nash would like to speak to that too. One of the reasons that we very deliberately, in the first and original steps, added working holiday visa holders to that entry was so we could get them in first, because they actually are part of our tourism workforce. So they are already able to enter New Zealand. Our hope is that they can start taking up some of the vacancies that may exist or the new jobs that may be created. What we're also expecting is that it will take time to build the tourism numbers. For those visa waiver countries that are eligible from the 1st of May, take, for example, North America. Many of them take up to 9 months to plan a trip to come to New Zealand. Travel here, for many, is a big deal. And so we are now well placed by announcing from the 1st of May to grab people's attention and grab them in our summer, by which time we expect that our industry will have been able to build up that capability. Minister Nash.
Yeah, and Prime Minister, what we did very early on is set up programs like Jobs for Nature, so people who were engaged or employed by the tourism sector in those areas where it was always going to be difficult to find other jobs could remain connected to their communities and to the sector. So that has certainly helped in places like West Coast, so we will expect some who used to work in the tourism sector will now come back into the sector due to the fact they've been able to remain in their communities through programs like Jobs for Nature.
Yeah, I will come to, and then Jen.
What about the maritime borders? Can we expect to see cruise ships come back?
Yeah, and that's something we actively have a work program on right now, how to ensure that we have consistency with these decisions today for our maritime border, including for cruise ships.
Sorry, what does that look like? So does that mean we're going to see cruise ships coming back?
Yeah, we will see the return of cruise ships. We haven't made those alterations formally to the border here today. Extra work that we need to go through, but we are expecting, of course, to bring forward the reopening for those borders as well.
An estimated timeline on that?
No, I don't hear now, but I'll see whether or not our officials can provide you with one.
In the longer term, do you have...
Sorry, Jim, and then Mark.
Sorry.
Prime Minister, looking ahead to May, have officials been talking to airlines about their plans for reopening routes to New Zealand? And is Tourism New Zealand looking at promotions for those markets?
Yes. Minister Nash, would you like to speak to the conversations with the airlines and also plans for Tourism New Zealand and their promotional activity?
Yeah, sure. First and foremost, the MIAC scheme, or the Maintaining International Air Connectivity, has been absolutely vital in terms of maintaining some of those air routes in COVID, and the airlines and the tourism sector have said that this has been absolutely vital. In terms of Tourism New Zealand, please be aware that throughout the whole COVID experience, tourism has continued to do a whole lot of work around aspirational brand New Zealand. They are now able to transfer their marketing into action. So whilst the aspiration and the brand has been kept alive in our key markets, they can now tell people to start booking. As mentioned, they're launching a new campaign into Australia this week on light of this decision, and also they'll be looking to launch a new campaign into Europe and the United States a little bit later.
Minister Nash, I understand that in North America, our tourism officials have already been working on a trade fair in June and July, and they already are seeing very strong interest. So they've been poised and ready for this moment, and as the Minister has said, have kept New Zealand in people's minds across the course of the last 2 years, and now it's time for them to turn that into reality.
So what we had heard is that things like the America's Cup, when people are in their European or US lockdown and stuck in their apartments in the middle of winter, they saw Kiwis on the Hauraki Gulf in the middle of summer, enjoying all the fantastic things that New Zealand has to offer. And keep in mind, we've been open for a lot longer in overall time period to a lot of other countries. That aspiration has built, and Tourism New Zealand has played on that aspiration and developed campaigns to turn that aspiration into action.
Did you have a follow-up question?
I noticed immigration instructions were just changed to allow Tourism NZ to bring promotional visitors for marketing PR. Is anything like that in the pipeline?
I would need to check. Can you speak to that, Minister Nash?
Yeah, I would need to check. I'll check with Minister Farfoy, but we are now, as mentioned...
You're going to appear anytime soon?
Well, of course, he'll be eligible from the 1st of May. But it is a good point. In the reverse, you'll see that a big focus for my future travel alongside trade delegations will be going into those markets where we know that there is a strong interest in New Zealand and using that as a promotional opportunity to bring visitors here.
Prime Minister,
Mark, Luke, and then I'll come back down to Jason.
in the longer term, do you have any expectation that there will be a point where non-New Zealand citizens who are unvaccinated can travel to New Zealand, maybe still needing a pre-departure test?
Yes, I expect that over time we will keep seeing changes. We haven't made those decisions today, but I anticipate we will continue to evolve our response. We are continuing to look at, for instance, pre-departure testing. You'll have seen we've already changed. Originally we required PCR, now we use rapid antigen testing, but in a supervised environment. I imagine that we will evolve that approach as the numbers become larger as well.
If someone goes...
Prime Minister, it's worth noting that actually a lot of airlines require passengers to be vaccinated or have a pre-departure test before they're even allowed on the plane. So they are the first barrier to entry for unvaccinated anyway.
If someone goes overseas and gets tests positive for COVID, how long do they have to stay there and recover before they're allowed to come back? And what's the procedure? Because often those pre-departure tests can show up with a positive result if they're no longer infectious.
Yes. Well, of course, you see that less with rapid antigen testing. So that's probably lesser of a problem now than it has been in the past. You know, you've got that much narrower window where it's demonstrating, where it's showing infection. When it comes to someone who may be in New Zealand, we will ask them to if they get COVID while they're in New Zealand, we will ask them to follow the same rules as anyone else who has COVID when they're in New Zealand, and that is stay home, get better, before you start moving about again. That's not unusual. A number of countries still have isolation requirements for people who have COVID, so we're not out of step, I would say, with many others.
Prime Minister, can I just on that?
Prime Minister, just on the pre-departure testing from Australia, tourist Australians wanting to come over here, will they have to go to like a private lab and pay for it, or will they be able to get it through, through Medicare or like a free pre-departure test? How's that going to work? Because obviously the cost of a pre-departure test can be a reasonable portion of the cost of a flight.
Yeah. So at the moment, we're asking for a supervised rapid antigen test. So I can't speak in detail to the offering of where that is undertaken. Of course, in New Zealand, you can get that done at your GP and in other sites reasonably easily. You can have a supervised rapid antigen test. And the only reason for the supervision, of course, is because then that gives you some form of proof of test. I do expect over time we'll see the evolution of the way that we're doing this, but at the moment, rapid antigen tests are available in most markets where we expect to see travel.
Australia, for example, it'd be most likely that you might have to go to a pharmacy or a path lab and they'll just supervise it, cite it.
Exactly. Anywhere that you're able to then have that documentation that you can use at the border, basically.
Prime Minister, can you also apply to the 2 tests once they arrive here?
So the 2 tests are exactly as we do it now. They come in at the border, we give them their tests, and that we have an expectation that they undertake them across the course of their time.
Requirement to have that supervised at the time that they're taking those tests?
No, it's just the same as the rules now. We do require them, if it's positive, to report that in, and we use an 0800 number that can be used for that, just to make it easy for a visitor who won't have the same My Health record online as other New Zealanders.
Is that
a follow-up, Henry?
Will you still get a follow-up PCR from a rat if you test positive?
Yeah, so at the moment we are wanting our international travellers to have that follow-up PCR because it's part of our surveillance regime. It allows us to see what's happening with variants. So we are using that as a tool at present. But at the same time, we are looking at whether or not there are other ways to build in that surveillance that might give us a bit of early and more diverse surveillance, so sampling of different flights from different parts of the country. So we'll keep analysing what will be best practice at the border.
Well, long term, when people might be, very deep into the New Zealand wilderness when they get their positive rate.
So this is, I guess, the point. So in the early days, we expect that we'll gradually grow our numbers. In the intervening period, we'll look at things, for instance, like whether or not we take samples from particular flights that are saliva before you even leave. Light touch, easy to do, but a good way to keep the surveillance up. So we'll keep evolving. What we want is gold standard surveillance at the border. In the same way that New Zealand's great at biosecurity, that we become really efficient at this kind of surveillance so that visitors aren't necessarily slowed down by it, but we're able to keep them safe and ourselves safe.
I'm sorry to come back to this, but can I just get some clarity around next week? So next week you will be making an announcement around the future.
Jason, I'm not going to give you the days today.
No, I don't need the dates. I just next week that is you will be making.
I actually on Monday gave you an indication that over the course of this week and next we would be considering, and that is because we have a cabinet committee and a cabinet process, and it's going through the full process. I'm not going to give precise dates because, of course, sometimes these things bounce around a little bit as we make decisions. But as soon as we have precise timelines for announcement, we'll make sure we share them with you. Yeah, Ben, I'm just going to take liberties given you're our Australian cousin today.
One for you, one for Mr. Nash.
Go for it.
So can you guarantee that Australians will be well cared for if they catch COVID and get sick in New Zealand? And what's the expectation if they just get COVID and aren't necessarily sick, they have to hunker down somewhere?
Yes, well, look, I'd like to consider that New Zealand has a gold standard regime for caring for people with COVID at home. Now, we make sure that where it needs to be light touch, it is. And where extra care is needed, it's provided. And so we'll look to make sure that people who are visiting, they already get a welcome pack, they already get their RATs provided for them. And of course, if they register a positive RAT, they would be part of our care at home system to make sure that they're well looked after. While I have the floor, I'll just add the exact numbers. We have 570,000 holders of a valid visitor visa currently offshore. Now, just for clarity, those visas are often multi-entry visas that can be held for up to 5 years, and they'll be held by, for instance, Chinese nationals and other non-visa waiver countries. So those are people who could enter under 1 May, just for a little bit of clarity.
Sorry, just an extension on that. So if a traveller comes here, gets COVID, you're saying just have enough money in your back pocket to buy a hotel for a week and isolate?
Yeah, so they would want to be prepared that should they have COVID, but I'd imagine that regardless, you'd want to be prepared at any time that should you need. Be prepared that if you need to stay in one place because you're sick. But that's with any travel. I've been stuck offshore with the flu before, and you just have to make sure that you've got provision to stay and recover safely.
You've launched a new tourism campaign today. I think it's Stop Dreaming and Go, but this is very similar to Within Your Wildest Dreams, or perhaps the other way around, which is the tourism campaign from last year. It's just a rebadged campaign, isn't it?
Oh, very similar, but it was very successful. And one thing I would say is the only time we don't like you is on the sports field. The rest of the time we treat you like our brothers and sisters. So Australians are going to be well looked after, and we're going to love seeing you. But it is a similar campaign. But as mentioned, very successful. It resonated really strongly with Australians. That's what all our market research showed. And now is the time to push the go button again.
Yeah, I'll come to Gemma and then Bernard. Yeah,
just on vaccines, aside from New Zealand vaccine passes, is there a requirement for tourists to be vaccinated to get through the border?
Yeah, so we do still, as Minister Nash has said, many airlines already require vaccinations for people to travel. And New Zealand is still requiring for non-citizens who are coming into the country to be vaccinated. But we use the same list of vaccines as the World Health Organization or those who are approved here. So a wide range of countries' current vaccines are accepted as being vaccinated here in New Zealand.
People overseas apply for a New Zealand vaccine pass?
I'd have to double check. We do have a process in order to be able to get a New Zealand vaccine pass, but I can assure you that this will not be prohibitive for a traveller here. If we are still using vaccine passes at that date, we will have a workable solution. But as I've already indicated, once we come down off that peak, we've not anticipated using them in the New Zealand system.
Prime Minister, do you have any advice or any expectation of the numbers who might come here from Australia and elsewhere over the next year or so compared to what is normal?
Yeah, Minister Nash, could I ask you to perhaps speak to that?
Yeah, look, what we've seen globally is that tourism is slow to come back. In Australia, for example, they haven't had as many tourists as they thought they would, so we do know this is going to be a bit of a slow burn. One of the reasons, not the main reason, but one of the reasons for the date announced is we do capture the Australian school holidays, and obviously the Queenstown and other ski areas will be ready and geared up for Australian skiers. The thing we know about Australians is they are the nation that travels the most for skiing. And so, it is really difficult to tell at this point in time. As the Prime Minister said, those from European and American countries, it is an aspirational trip to come to New Zealand. People obviously save hard, and they plan long. So it will be interesting to see, but we're not expecting pre-COVID numbers in a great hurry. I mean, even the head of Heathrow said he's expecting 5 years. So, don't expect it overnight is what I will say.
But in a competitive market where people are looking to bring tourists back, New Zealand is well placed. The one other point I neglected to make is that for some non-visa waiver countries where we have in the past had large markets, it's actually some of the restrictions that exist in country that are also prohibitive. In China, my recollection is that you're required to isolate for 3 weeks on return. So there are other elements at play that will affect travel in those areas.
Just on another issue.
Sorry, Craig, I have
just on another issue, the Ukraine war, US officials say they believe China has decided to send missiles and drones to Russia to use in Ukraine. What's your message to China about supporting Russia?
I haven't been briefed on that, and nor could I speak specifically on any of the statements that are being made by US officials in that regard. But we've been consistent, particularly with members of the Security Council of the United Nations, that we believe each member needs to take a strong stand on the invasion of Ukraine by Russia.
China's stand is strong enough against?
Well, I don't want to speak specifically on some of the claims that have been made, but we've also not wanted to make assumptions as to where they would sit on this, given that they have expressed support for the territorial integrity of Ukraine.
Rats in schools.
Yeah.
Is it sensible really to be using schools as a distribution centre for rats? I mean, it's another thing on top of a lot that they're already dealing with.
I wouldn't describe it in that way. Look, we already have rats widely available for individuals who are symptomatic. But the reality is, every parent will know that there will be a time or an occasion where their child may be perfectly fine when they go to school and then suddenly may come down with a fever, a sore throat, or feel unwell. This is a really practical thing we can do to make it easy for families if their child, when they're sent home, goes home with a rat and rapid antigen test for the family. It's just to make it easier.
To what extent are we seeing in this outbreak schools as a vector for transmission?
We're seeing schools as being reflective of what's happening in the wider community. I reflect here and draw heavily from experts like Dr. Jin Russell, who has said that schools will simply reflect what you see going on around them, and that it certainly appears to be the case in our experience.
GPs are saying that they can't keep up at the moment and are worried about... GPs are saying that they can't keep up at the moment. They're worried about competing demands of flu, RSA and whooping cough. When are we going to shift away from COVID and let doctors catch up on everything else?
I would like the situation where we didn't have our health professionals having to juggle COVID alongside, of course, the day-to-day ailments they're usually dealing with. What you've described are often winter-heavy ailments. One of the reasons why we have talked about still needing measures that help us get through winter and why we need the broader flu vaccine campaign that we've already announced is because we want to make sure we're well prepared for waves that are likely to come during the winter season when flu, RSV and others will also be present.
Got a message for Minister Hipkins, who's just tested positive for COVID?
I spoke to Minister Hipkins this morning. It's fair to say he did sound under the weather. We still managed to get a few work things done, but as with anyone who has COVID, I wish him and them the speediest of recoveries and just really want to support rest. It's one of the best things that people can do to aid their recovery.
You'll get it. A lot of people around you seem to be going down with it.
No, thank you. Look, I've the expectation, I'm sure like everyone does, that we all need to be prepared just in case. So I don't see myself as being superhuman. I face the same exposure risk as everyone, and I hope I'm as prepared as everyone else just in case.
On visa-waiver countries, you mentioned that some of them have restrictions, like long isolation periods needed, but that doesn't stop us from setting our reopening date. So why have we not been given a reopening date for non-visa waiver countries like India, like China?
Simply because in those circumstances, there are more factors that we need that are in play, like, for instance, the substantial processing that we'll need to have capacity for those non-visa waiver countries. I expect that we'll be able to give a clearer picture on the reopening dates for those markets shortly. However, many of those markets aren't simply ready to travel as well. China has significant isolation requirements for returning travellers that will be a disincentive to come to New Zealand at this point.
Aren't prepared to take them?
No, not at all. You'll see here that for those where we have already in play all of the ingredients, we are reopening. 1st of May for non-visa waiver countries and also for the 570,000 people who already hold temporary visas. They are welcome. What we need to work through next is how we can ensure in a timely way the processing of visas for those other countries.
Lillian, can you just, 2 questions on rats in the schools. Yeah. Can you give a sort of specific date on when those tests will actually be with the schools who opt in? You know, would they be waiting 2 weeks or?
No, that's not my understanding. I might come back to you with a specific date, but no, it's not something that we expect to take particularly long.
In terms of
it's coming from our central supplier of the Ministry of Health, so that's why it shouldn't take too long.
Securing a specific supply for school, why hasn't that happened sooner, given the sort of disruption that we've seen for schools and also students and staff?
And look, ultimately, there's, of course, through COVID, been disruption in a range of different workplaces and settings. What we wanted to consider here was the advantages of a different approach for RAT distribution. At the moment, everyone who's symptomatic is able to access free rapid antigen tests. This was about whether or not there were extra advantages to providing them in school rather than at those other really accessible points. What we've also done is provided surveillance testing for ECEs. That's an environment where we have children who aren't able to be vaccinated, who aren't able to wear masks, and for these good reasons for us to put extra surveillance in.
That has been done sooner though, given we're well aware that boosters are what is protecting us from Omicron, and a lot of these kids won't have been able to access boosters, let alone ECU, like you say, who can't be vaccinated at all.
And again, what we've done is change the way that people are able to access tests. They can receive these tests already in their community. 1.4 million tests were distributed in one week recently. We have wide availability. This is just an extra way to distribute them to families.
All right,
maybe last one.
Are you still scanning in, and what's the point of it?
Yeah, look, one of the things that we'll be considering is the way that contact tracing will be used in the future of our COVID management. There are still some high-risk environments where, for instance, aged residential care, where you do want to make sure that you have a good understanding and system to be able to contact trace. But more broadly, we do need to look at whether or not it's a tool we still need, and that's one of the things Cabinet is considering over the next week. Yes, I am. But just so you know, I keep 2 systems. I, of course, have a paper-based system that you'll see I release as part of my proactive diary release, and also I supplement it with scanning too. Thanks.